So moving on to the next session, I'm very pleased to introduce people very close to my heart, Jeff and Leonie, who work for me and have done so for many years. Leonie is our head of project services and does quite a lot of management of projects within eLAW, as does Jeff. Leonie is a lawyer and worked in private practice prior to going into litigation or legal technology. And prior to joining eLAW, she actually worked in London for many years with another legal technology provider. Jeff heads up our software products division, although he's just been promoted recently to head of client services. And he too has worked for quite a number of years supporting our clients in their eDiscovery matters. And prior to joining eLAW, he worked for the Department of Justice in the US and as a consultant to firms in the United States before moving out to Australia. So please welcome Jeff and Leonie.
You have the eLAW double act this afternoon. Triple act. So we're going to bring it back to, I guess, what we as eDiscovery providers experience on a day-to-day basis in our job. We deal with lawyers on a day-to-day basis and the problems they face in just managing the discovery process, working with the systems that they've got, and making it as efficient as possible. So I'll just a little bit about eLAW. Most of you probably would know. We were founded in 1999, so it's our 15-year birthday today. We have drinks afterwards, if hopefully you're all coming. We started off by providing high-end services direct to the legal team in the courts through the Royal Commissions, and then we sort of worked our way backwards across the litigation life cycle, so now we provide an end-to-end service. We started offering Relativity, which is the review platform we offer since October 2010, and we have offices around Australia. There's our friendly faces. I'll just flick through, to this slide. I was going to start off with a few quotes, perhaps, that maybe some of you lawyers in the room have said to your internal eDiscovery people or to your external providers, and just to emphasise that eDiscovery platforms are only as good as, I guess, the relationship you have with the people that are running it, and what you can do to customise it and get the maximum benefit out of it will have the best impact on the case that you're running. And that last summarising quote there: a poorly planned and executed review strategy can be detrimental to a case, and maximising the benefit of the software will keep the team organised and on track. I guess in many cases a legal team, they require some level of customisation in their eDiscovery platform to capture all the elements of their case. A review system that's straight out of the box will often mean the legal team will need to supplement that system with things outside of the system, such as spreadsheets and tables and everything else that they need to manage their case. And we don't think that that's necessarily needed. And I guess what we strive for is to make sure that the platform that you're using has everything encompassed within it, so that you don't need to work externally outside of it. So maybe you've heard those comments. We certainly have. Maybe you've made those comments, and what we try and do is to prevent those sort of comments and make sure that their lawyers' experience is a good one, and that they get the benefit out of their cases. So how this is going to work is, we have two of us speaking. So Jeff's going to run through some of our case studies that we've worked on, and just some of the customisations that can help on a practical level, the lawyers throughout the discovery process. So I'll hand over to Jeff.
Thanks, Leonie. This one. So we've found that many of our review cases start as a simple relevance and privilege review. There was talk earlier about preparing for discovery and preparing for your case or for trial at the same time. So when that occurs, when you're kind of preparing your case at the same time, a lot of additional complications we've found arise where we're trying to pull in not just relevant yes, no, but really what's going on in the case and pulling that into the software. So we've actually developed a few kind of additional functionality in some of our cases. We've talked a lot about what the future is and what's coming from the US. This is kind of some of the cutting edge stuff that we've been working on over the last couple of years. Now, LEONIE and I were talking a few months ago about our speaking spot today, and as a sponsor, we're in the unique position where we get to really talk about anything we like. We thought we'd probably avoid just a software demo and talk about some things we thought would be interesting. So hopefully you'll find them interesting as well. Our clients often ask us, can the software do all sorts of miraculous things? And sometimes we actually get to say yes. And that's what some of these examples we think are close to that. Okay, so some of the ones we're going to be looking at are, first of all, managing large numbers of reviewers through advanced workflow logic. So I think it was John Emmerich who made the point this morning, the challenge of managing junior reviewers. In one of our cases, we developed a pretty advanced workflow, and we'll talk about that kind of to help manage that process. Case management, and this is where we talk a lot about discovery review and the millions of documents. Well, there's some cases there out there that the documents are important, but there's kind of other aspects of the case that traditionally would be kept somewhere outside of a review system, in somebody's head, in Word files and notes, and we've been trying to pull those into the review system and integrate it. One of our cases, we had a large number of expert witnesses and how to manage the documents, getting them all their documents, not giving them the same documents again, just how to manage that process. Our favorite thing, duplicates, and how do we manage duplicates. This is kind of day in, day out what we're doing, and we have a interesting case that we thought we'd talk about, which has a bit twist on how we use that. Reporting on the reviewers. Again, how do you manage this large team of junior reviewers? We've done a little bit with the software to help make that process easier. Again, we call it rule-driven subjective coding enforcement and link creation, which is probably a really bad title. But we've put some controls in place to help guide the review teams on what the decisions they're making and kind of limiting it in certain areas. And finally, lots of talk about analytics elsewhere, predictive coding elsewhere in this conference. We're just going to talk briefly about, we've been kind of testing some of the features against what keywords or human reviewers and trying to compare the two. So we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, so our first case study was about, it was a government agency, and they had about 80,000 highly relevant documents. So relevance review wasn't as important in this case. But they did have a complicated legal analysis with all of these documents, especially with respect to privilege. There was comments earlier about drilling into privilege. They really did drill into it in this case. Now, their requirements were, it was a government agency. They had about 20 staff working on it. It seemed like the staff was out on study leave a lot. They didn't work certain Fridays. Maybe I'm being a bit cheeky, but it's probably true in any organization. You don't have, it was hard for these guys to get all 20 members into the same room to kind of brief them. So we developed, we realized that kind of an advanced workflow was going to be required for this case, and individual teams kind of assigned to different sections of the case. And we'll use the software to help manage that. So this slide is actually our stock standard workflow diagram. So at the beginning of most cases, we'd sit down and say, this is our generic workflow. It's just simply privilege and relevance. If they're not relevant, they get excluded, and then if they're privileged, they go on the privilege list. If they're not, they go on to the list of documents for disclosure, and maybe some redactions are needed. What we developed in this case was a bit more complicated, and each one of these boxes represents documents at some point in their life cycle. And they start, are they relevant? We still have that same start. If not, kind of chuck them. If they are, they kind of get filtered down. This middle bit here is all about the various types of privilege they had, and they had special teams reviewing really each box on here. This one was so complicated, they had a second team reviewing what the first team did. And eventually things would move down onto the various lists of documents. So the result in this one was they were able to efficiently manage or efficiently review those 80,000 documents without kind of constantly re-reviewing them. That part-time staff issue, I mean, they'd assign a few staff onto certain ones of those boxes, and then the staff would just review, what's been automatically kind of being dropped into their boxes. It took a lot of work to actually hash out this complicated workflow, and lots of questions and meetings back and forth, and pretty much weekly we were sitting with the client figuring out what needs to be done. So there was a lot of work to manage this process, but it absolutely drove the whole review. Everything where they were doing was being encompassed kind of in this diagram. And ultimately they were able to use it then, they allowed staff turnover and new staff constantly, and we were able to use this kind of documentation and the software to be able to train the new staff as well. Okay, the next case study it's a construction case. At the heart of it was a financial payments threat dispute. Now, although there were 150,000 documents in the case, that actually wasn't the crux of the case. There was, or the challenge about managing the case, rather, was there was a large number of legal issues present in the case. There were lots of litigations going on, all related to the same matter. Several hundred companies were involved, and then they had thousands of payments involved. So kind of stop thinking about documents for the moment. In this case, it was just payments. They had all these payments. They had to figure out all sorts of things about the payments. So they were asking questions like, which companies are involved in each litigation, which of the documents relate to the companies, the payments, how do the payments relate to each of the companies, which payments support our case and which harm it. So it became, put aside the document review, the documents were needed to prove the existence of these payments, but ultimately, really they were going to be arguing about the payments themselves. So what we did with the software, if you've used any kind of review software, you're used to seeing this table of documents with your document type and your dates and authors and these sort of things. So we actually created several new tables in the database and created a table for companies, for issues, and for payments, and then allowed linking between all of these different entities. So when they were done, effectively the partner running this, he said to me basically, at the end I need one screen. I can sit with my client, see all the payments, see some of the issues, which were generally, does this help our case, does this hurt our case, and then see if there's a document under each of those issues for those payments. And we were able to kind of model the software so that he had that one kind of screen. And again, getting away from the documents, he didn't actually really need to see the documents, just need to see that one was there. And so their whole workflow revolved around that payments. Historically, I think clients would probably manage this in maybe some Excel file that's floating around or a Word file, and that's okay, but you can only have one person working on it, and you can't really get the relationships between all the various issues in the case in one simple spreadsheet. You need a whole database. Another case we had to do with it was the interesting part was had to do with expert witnesses. It was about the failure of state to manage or to protect industry and result in lots of destruction of stock. So there was a large number of experts in this case who were really placed all over the world. That we had witnesses who were international, interstate, and living in rural places, and the challenge of managing how do you get all these documents to these witnesses on an ongoing basis was a challenge. So we used the software. We developed some extra functionality, some beautiful screenshots for you. Basically what we did was each expert would get, an issue tag, which is simple enough, and then as the team's reviewing at some certain dates, a tranche would get sent off to this expert, and I should say released to the expert. So we actually let the experts log in. It would all be locked down for them. They would only see the documents that have been released to them, and they were able to use the system in that way. The traditional paper-based method would be to print everything out and ship it off to all the experts. And look, in theory, that sounds fine, but then, this went on for maybe 18 months, and every few months the team would have new documents, and what do? Do you send them a few documents and they insert them into their print set? I mean, it's not really going to happen. Do you print everything out again and send them an update? It just, let's try to save a few trees here. So we're able to kind of modify the software to manage that aspect of the case. Our near duplicate detection, which is old software by probably compared to predictive coding. Traditionally, it's used for really identifying duplicates in hard copy or versions of electronic documents. We had an interesting case where there were lots of financial contracts, and the case revolved around changes in terms and conditions in the fine print over time. And, look, we could have printed everything out and gotten out magnifying glasses, and I think somebody made a point this morning how boredom actually, people are missing things. It's not just unpleasant, reviewing these kind of documents, but if you're bored to tears reading through the same kind of text over and over again, you can actually miss small changes. So we use this software to, one, identify the similar documents, which was helpful, but then really just spot the differences between these subtle differences. So it pointed the reviewers directly to kind of what we're looking at. We just put in a few screenshots, fairly generic, of lumping together similar documents and then highlighting the differences, which can be very subtle, number changes in documents. And are you taking this one?
Yeah.
Musical chairs here, excuse me.
I have the exciting rule-driven subjective coding enforcement and link creation. Thanks for that one, Jeff. Running projects and working with lawyers, the lawyers are asking you, how can we be more efficient? I don't want to do this. Can I do it? Can I have another button so I don't have to do this extra step? And it comes down to what John Emmerich was probably mentioning in his talk earlier, where the young lawyers don't want to do these boring tasks. They don't want to do the boring, mundane discovery review. And so a lot of these rules that we can develop within these review platforms can maybe cut down on some of those mundane tasks. So if it's just a matter of them not having to click a few extra buttons, then that might save them quite a lot of time in the long run. So you've got things also around, like when you've doing a discovery review and you're doing issue and relevance reviews, you need consistency across that, and is there going to be time spent at the end of that, re-reviewing documents because there's inconsistency across the document review. So simple things like, having rules within the system to prevent that from happening during the discovery to begin with can cut down on the actual time at the end by lawyers, having to do these mundane tasks of re-reviewing documents or checking those inconsistencies rather than concentrating on the issues of the case and doing their lawyerly work. Similarly with privilege and redaction consistency, there's rules that you can develop within these platforms that can make sure that the redactions are done correctly, or if you select a document as being privileged, or part privileged, there is a redaction on the document. Very, very simple things that may not seem that that difficult, but if those sort of rules aren't within the database, there can be a lot of time spent at the end of the review manually checking these things to make sure that what is going out for discovery is correct. So we had one case in particular where chronologies are obviously a big thing for cases, and a lot of the time lawyers are creating these chronologies outside of their discovery platforms for whatever reason. But if they've got that ability to do that within the review platform, then it makes it easier to tie everything together. So there was one case where the case preparation revolved around the chronology, as it was all about the timeline and understanding the witnesses and their roles. So there was rules and codes developed within the platform that meant that when a document was tagged as a witness or an event, there was an automated function that then tagged the appropriate witnesses against that event. So it just meant that those extra steps that you might have to take in linking those witnesses to events or linking those documents to events can be automatically done within the platform, and it means that the lawyers can then focus just on the chronology itself and prepare for their witness interviews and prepare their case in general. Similarly, we often get queries from the more senior lawyers in our team wanting to manage their paralegals or their more junior lawyers to make sure that the review process is going smoothly. It could just be a matter of they're wanting to keep track of who's the fastest reviewer, who's the slowest reviewer, can we get rid of that slowest reviewer and replace them with someone more faster, and how do they find that information out. So this is an extra sort of customization that's been built into Relativity, where you have daily and weekly totals of user statistics. So documents that are reviewed by reviewers, you have the totals over the day and over the week, and that obviously can be very, very useful for those people that are managing those reviews, just to make sure that those discovery reviews are on track. Now, this was also even more useful. It probably went one step further on a particular matter where there was a recovery of costs issue. And so for this particular case, the client was actually only successful on part of their claim, which meant that they could only recover costs for certain parts of the case and certain documents that maybe were looked at or against certain issues. So, if that was to be done, if people were to find that out on manually, they would maybe have to go through timesheets. But timesheets would be quite a tedious task, and also maybe not that specific, because timesheets might just say, I worked on this case for 3 hours, but they wouldn't say what they looked at and what issues they were considering at the time. So this automated sort of custom reporting on the reviewer statistics was quite helpful, because you were able to pull information from the audit history and provide hourly based usage reports only on documents for which the costs could be recovered. And that was very, very important on that matter, and it allowed them to recover the accurate amount of costs they needed to recover. So we're going to sort of delve into analytics now. There's a lot of, obviously, most of this conference is around the predictive coding element. So we're going to sort of talk about a particular case that we're running a test case on analytics. We had Jason Barron mention this morning that, as a lawyer, he tries to get data that's already been reviewed manually or by keyword searches to then be tested with analytics to check, whether the analytics would have worked for that case. So this is what we're sort of doing at the moment on a particular matter which has already been reviewed manually. And I guess, what we're hearing from the legal profession in general in Australia on analytics is, do they trust it, basically? How effective is it? Is it really oversold? Because often technology can be, and, something that is all the rage now, is it going to be found out to be a dud in 3 years' time? Or which features are reliable and which features are best for your matter? So that's what we've tried to do on this particular case study, and hopefully, answer a few of those questions. And Jeff will take you through that. Off you go, Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah, so we were presented with kind of a unique situation where we have a fairly, switched on client who's excited about some of this new technology, but the client in particular, she's a senior associate at a commercial firm. Her point is, how do I convince my client to pay for these kind of extra technology and rely on this technology. And, you know, it's a good, very fair point, you know, and we, you know, we get all this great news out of the US, and, you know, I was at a conference last year where that's all they're talking about, but it's still not being used day to day in Australia by any means. So what we've been able to do, and are in the process, I should say this is an ongoing kind of study, we're evaluating each of the kind of features within this predictive coding software, which Relativity is branded analytics. So we actually took kind of a dead case with this client, where they manually reviewed 35,000 documents, split up between some junior reviewers and 2 senior reviewers. It was primarily a yes-no relevance exercise, and they had a few months to conduct the review. So the key takeaway to start here is at the end, they identified about 8% of those 35,000 as actually relevant to the case. So what we did then is we started testing one of the features. In Relativity, it's called clustering. Each product kind of names these things differently. But what it does is you can point it at a group of documents, in this case the 35,000, and it comes up with all the topics. It actually generates those topics, gives you some text, labels those topics, then assigns the various documents against those topics. So it's designed to kind of give you a first pass review and guide your review, kind of where do I start? Well, let's start with the ones that look really relevant and finish with the ones that don't look relevant at all. So we had a couple of specific questions that we wanted to test and find out the answers to. One is, do those cluster titles, which are computer generated, accurately guide us towards the documents that, one, are conceptually similar to each other, and are they actually relevant to the case that we're working on? So kind of to break those questions down, are the documents within the cluster relevant to the cluster itself? Are they conceptually similar to each other? And then those clusters, are they actually kind of all relevant or all not relevant? And the final question that we wanted to address was, you know, it ranks these nice clusters for us. The ones that appear to be not relevant based off some of the titles, can we actually disregard those? So we worked with our senior associate and put all these questions together and kind of assigned her very specific tasks for her to review documents. And she went through some of the clusters. First, reviewed all the titles and some of the documents in those titles to determine, are they actually relevant or not relevant? Picked a few that appeared to be relevant. That's a very quick exercise. And then reviewed one of the clusters in here, which had several hundred documents. So now, this technology, you get clusters and then subclusters, which are kind of topics within topics. But she evaluated whether they had to do with the whole cluster together. So in answer to our first question, we found the documents that it lumped together that she reviewed, we found that 86% of those documents were actually about the same topic. I think it was about pipes or something like that. So it scored well on actually the documents were relevant to each other. But then were the documents within there actually relevant to the case itself? Because if you remember, only 8% initially of the whole case were relevant, so fairly low. And we found that in that cluster, 29% of the documents in the cluster were marked as generally relevant. So I'll get to my conclusions in a moment, I guess. Then our final question was, can we disregard the clusters that appear at first glance to be not relevant at all? And so we actually reviewed some of these clusters and found that out of the 4 kind of clusters that appeared to be not relevant, 3 of them had relevant documents in them, although 2 of them only had 2. One of them didn't have any relevant documents at all. However, one of them did have 100 relevant documents, which was a significant percentage of the 750 that was in there. So this is kind of an ongoing study, but from our initial kind of analysis of it, we came up with a few, I guess, gut instinct conclusions. So we can rely on clustering to group conceptually similar documents. So it can divvy up the documents in a way where you can actually have documents that are similar, separated out. The titles, we cannot reliably rely on the titles to completely exclude sets of documents, as we found relevant documents within kind of non-relevant titles. And then, but we can kind of come up with a workflow on how to use this software. And the recommended workflow is senior associate goes through the cluster titles, looks at a few samples within each of those clusters, and then we're able to batch out the documents based off those clusters, and starting with this most relevant or suspected most relevant, and then kind of ending with those least relevant.
Okay, this is the last of the slides. So I guess in conclusion, maybe if an eDiscovery process goes well, and if you're communicating well with your eDiscovery vendor or your in-house eDiscovery consultant, maybe these are some of the comments that you'll make, or maybe you just think them and don't tell anyone. But again, I've just got that last comment at the start: a poorly planned and executed review strategy can be detrimental to a case, and maximising the benefit of the software will keep the team organised and on track. And I guess the key to that is communication between the legal team and the eDiscovery consultants. And if they work together and discuss what needs to be gotten out of the case or gotten out of the whole review process, then the review platform will be used to the maximum benefit. Any questions? Any comments, anecdotes? Yes.
This is to Jeff. So you were working with a dead case. You already had relevance assessments, but you're getting your senior associate to do new relevance assessments?
Well, yeah. I mean, in this case, we didn't entirely trust all the relevance from the junior reviewers that were involved. Or the senior associate running it. So we wanted, I guess, some new data to compare by. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And have you compared the agreement between the new judgments and the old judgments?
So that is the next step that's in progress. So we're actually running the full predictive coding. We're doing the rounds of discovery, and then to compare what did the junior reviewers say versus what did the senior associate say on the tiny set with the power of the technology assisted review. Yep. So we don't have that yet, but
so next year.
Yeah.
We'll have it.
Great, thanks.
Yes, sure.
That they'll become complacent, and how do you mitigate that? They might think, well, the software says it's relevant. I'm not really sure. I'm a bit tired again. I'll just agree with the software. Is that something you think could happen?
Well, I mean, I think what we've seen is the software doesn't necessarily instantly clump all the relevant documents together. It's still kind of topics within the case material. So I wouldn't expect them to, we wouldn't give them the instructions, these are all relevant, or these are all probably relevant, or all relevant. I guess instruction, working with the case team on that front would be key. The clear instructions that these probably aren't all relevant, but I know it's not. Yeah, they'll be similar, but yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think naturally there'll probably be a few in there, but yeah. A QA would be an important part to kind of check that. So the senior associate coming back through and still QAing a fair amount. Sometimes with the software we're able to see, run reports and see some of the outliers. And so if somebody was doing everything as relevant, those are my only thoughts. The only other point I wanted to make, which was raised earlier, was about costs and the expense of discovery in general, and specifically the software. I guess in certain scenarios, there are cases certainly that the parties wouldn't necessarily have the resources to. I think the vast bulk is the lawyer's time, which we're trying to minimize that time and bring the costs down. I do recognize, of course, we have fees for our services and software. Just the one thing that we've been able to do, which we've been excited about, is some of our clients, our law firm clients, have pro bono matters. And in some of those matters, we've been able to say, hey, look, we can kind of extend our services at no cost as well. We know you are doing this. And we've been able to get our, we buy a lot of our software, and we've been able to get those companies to waive the license fees in that instance. So there are some scenarios where we're trying, I guess, to give access to some of these great tools to parties who otherwise couldn't afford them.
Any other questions? Right, thanks, Jeff and Leonie. And